Welcome back to all of our VITA tax preparers. We're going to continue on now with session 1B, the second half of what would be the first session in a face-to-face live training. The first part of this video will go over how to create an account in the Parctice Lab, which is the sandbox, if you will, where we prepare returns using the TaxSlayer software. Now, if you watch the very first video that was called Link and Learn tutorial, you created a Parctice Lab account and you can kind of skip forward, and I have a table of contents. But the latter half of this video is we're going to walk through how to actually create a return in TaxSlayer, which you're going to need to know because going forward from here, you're going to be preparing returns. You're going to have to prepare 3 different returns for your certification exam. So we want to give you an idea of how to use TaxSlayer. So good. So let's get started, and I will share my screen here. Okay. So now we're going to start saying how to create an account in Parctice Lab. Okay. There's several ways to access this. One is to use this link right here. And if I were you, once you get into this link, I would bookmark it in your browser because you're going to be coming back to this quite often. Okay, so you could use this direct link, or you can go to the linklearncertification.com website. And remember when we showed you that first home page of that, there was a little quick link there for Parctice Lab. You could access it that way as well. Okay, so this is very important, and many students get confused at this at first, okay, is there's actually 2 passwords to get into Parctice Lab. There's this first general gateway, and you need to write this password down. It doesn't tell you anywhere where it is, but to first even get to where you can sign in to the Parctice Lab, you have to enter this password right here, Train Pro Web, all caps. Write that down and have that handy, okay? Then it'll take you to this screen. And if you already have a username, of course, you can log in right there, but I'm assuming most of you need to create an account. So we're going to look at what you do to create an account in Parctice Lab. You'll click on this button right here, and then it takes you to this entry screen right here. A couple of things. You're going to enter an email address and confirm that email address right here. However, this is important, is make sure that this is an email address you can access, because if you forget your password, they're going to send you a link to that email address. Okay. Now, you're going to type in a password. This gets really complicated. I warned you at first when we were talking about Link and Learn, that was kind of a simple password. I think it was 8 characters or something. This one gets much more complex. It has to be 15 characters, 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, 1 special character. And when you start typing this in, if it doesn't meet the requirements, a little thing is going to pop up right here that tells you what the minimum requirements are. So pay careful attention. And when you finally get the right password, as I said, it's got to be 15 characters long, has to have an uppercase, a lowercase, and a number, and a special character. Okay, so that gets kind of complex. Again, that was why I was telling you in the last session, it's really important you find a way to keep track of your passwords. And in the last session, I gave you a link to a document that you could kind of carry with you, or put into your 4012 book, the book that you're going to be taking to your VITA sites as well. Then you're going to come down here in the program type, you're going to select down here, it'll be VITA that you're going to select. You do not have to put in a site identification number. It's not required. But then you will have recovery questions that you got to do here, because if you forget your password, it's going to ask you a recovery question and then send you a link. When you get all of that done, then you're going to click on this down here to say create account. Okay. Now, This is for Parctice Lab, and Parctice Lab uses the Tax Slayer software program, which is the same program we're going to use on the site. But when you get on the site, it's going to be a different username and password. Remember, I told you there's 3 sets of usernames and passwords. So that's why it's important to keep track of it. When you get to a site, your site coordinator is going to tell you what your username is, or what, and different sites have different processes for doing this. So, but then you'll be allowed to change the password after the first time you sign in. Um, again, use an email address that you can get access to wherever you are at a site. Okay. So, how do you access the Parctice Lab once you get in here? From the home page, and actually you could go to the home page of the VITA TCE Central. And if you recall, in the last video I showed you down there were links down there below where it could say you could go to Parctice Lab. Here's another way, is you can go to My Learning, and then I'm going to go to the next slide. And then down here at the bottom of the My Learning page, you can access that quick learning resources right here. And when you access that, you get these quick links. We kind of showed you how you could get to different booklets in here, but right down here is that Parctice Lab right here. So that's how you can get there. So as I said, there's 2 gateways to the Parctice Lab. The first screen is going to get you here, and you want to type in Train Pro Web in all caps. That'll get you to the second screen where you sign in with that username and password that you just created. Okay. Then when you sign in, voila, you're taken to this screen right here. Now, to get to the practice area, you would click here, but I kind of want to, and in the Link and Learn video, I went over some of these things about how you can actually get information on how to use Tax Slayer. These screens, I went a little bit forward here. There's different things here you can click here to explore and look at different user guides, look at how to input income, or do even practice returns that'll then give you the answers at the end so you can kind of check yourself, see how you do. So I'm going to go back up here, right here. This is once you get into Parctice Lab, it'll say here, welcome to Parctice Lab. And then you want to click right here to start a return. So once we click here and start a return, oh, by the way, here was the screen with those practice returns I was telling you about right there. Okay. Again, we'll go back here. You click here to start a return. Here's how you start a return. Now, you may wonder, well, where do I get the Social Security number? Here's where you want to go to that publication 6744. I know you're saying, what's that? That's the test booklet. And as a new volunteer, we'll give you a hard copy of the test booklet, or you can download a PDF. I showed you how to do that in the previous slides. And in that booklet, you're going to want to navigate to the advanced test and look at the scenarios. Now, scenarios 1 through 6 don't require a tax return. So there's no information about Social Security numbers there. But 7, 8, and 9 require a tax return. So if you go to scenario 7, and it's going to show you Social Security cards. And there you're going to put in the information for that. And then you'll click in Start a Return. So the next screen that you get when you're doing a return after you put in that Social Security number is asking you about the filing status. Now, the rest of these slides, just to give you kind of a preview, do not get overwhelmed with this. All I'm trying to do here is give you an idea of how you're creating returns in Tax Slayer. You do not have to memorize all of this at once, okay? I'm just going to give you a preview of how this works. So the first thing is filing status. And you're saying, well, how do I know what the filing status is? The next session, we're going to start talking about filing statuses and explain that to you. Also, usually in these scenarios that you're going to do for the certification exam, they're pretty much telling you, oh, they're single or they're married filing jointly or whatever. You may have to figure out whether they're head of household or not, but we'll get to that in a minute. The next screen is their personal information. Everything's going to start with this basic information tab. And by the way, there's a quick navigation bar over here to the left where you can jump to different sections of the tax return. But we're starting here with basic information, personal information here. See, we already did filing status over here, right? Now, we're going to go into type in the taxpayer's first name. By the way, notice these little stars right here, the red asterisks. Those are required fields. If you miss one of those and you try to go forward, it's gonna stop you and tell you, hey, you got to put in this information. But notice you don't have to put in a middle initial. Although if it's given to you, you should use it. I would use it. Okay. Here's you're going to put in this. Now the social security number for the first one will already be pre-populated because when you created the return, this is assuming there's at least one taxpayer and this is the first taxpayer. So this is already populated. Now you got date of birth and you're going to say, well, where will I get that? Okay. Well, in the next session, we're going to talk about the intake and interview and quality review. Or if you watched that Link and Learn tutorial, that first video, we went over the intake and interview sheet. And that's where you're getting all this personal information from your taxpayer. The date of birth will be on that. They'll have filled in what their occupation is. There's several questions down here you should go over to make sure that doesn't apply. Like, for instance, maybe you're doing a 16-year-old who's worked, worked a summer job, and we're just filing a return for them to get their refunds back. But they can be claimed on their parents' return. And there's several other questions below this. We won't go over this now, but this is an important screen to go over. Oh, here's some more questions. And by the way, this is just kind of interesting. I would tell you this little box right here, a taxpayer wishes to contribute $3 to the presidential election campaign fund. That question has been on tax returns since I started 30 years ago. Of course, it used to be $1, right? Inflation hit there. In all of my years of preparing a tax return, I don't think I've ever seen anybody who said they wanted to contribute to that. Not to say you shouldn't, okay? That has no judgment here. But I happen to notice in these scenarios on the interview sheets, for some reason, they're all starting to check that box about contributing $3. So anyway, you probably want to pay attention to that is all I'm trying to say here. Okay. Then down here, we're going to put in the address. Now, here's the zip code screen. Once you type in the zip code, it's going to pre-populate the city and state that's there. It looks it up for you. Okay. So once you put in the zip code, it populates this, does it? In VITA, when it says resident state here, it should populate with Arizona. Most of our VITA sites, we do not do multi-state returns or out-of-state returns. There's a few sites that may have site coordinators and experienced people, but especially you as new volunteers, you're not going to be doing any of this. So you should not have a return that has anything other than the resident state of Arizona. Notice that a telephone number is important, and please be sure to get that. They'll have it written on the intake and interview form. But if for some reason this return rejects, this is the only way the site coordinator can get in touch with this person to fix the return. So it's really important we get an accurate telephone number there. Okay. Now, next, you want to hit continue. And some of these screens in Tax Slayer, especially this one, if you don't use the continue one, in other words, if you try to just jump using this menu, it's going to beep at you and say, hey, you got to make sure you hit continue and save all of this information. So try to use the continue buttons on here. Okay, so we've put in that, but what if you didn't finish the return, right? And after you were done, you would say here log out, or you could go in here and click on this client search to see the returns you've already started. Okay. So we kind of went over personal information, filing status. We did those two. Then there's another one that'll say dependents. And in fact, once you hit continue, it's going to ask you, do you have any dependents on this return? Now, where are you going to find that information? And two things I would tell you is that we need to see the Social Security card for everybody that's on that return. And then on the intake and interview form, there's a section down at the bottom of page 1 where the taxpayer is going to write in everybody who lived with them in the household. Now, it's going to be up to you to determine if the person who lives in that household is their dependent or not. Again, we're going to go over more details of that in a moment. Okay? Whenever you're entering information in here, please go slow, be sure it's accurate, because if you transpose a number or mix it up and the reviewer doesn't catch it, we file the return and it rejects. We have to call the taxpayer up and we have to fix it and usually reprint their returns. It's just kind of a mess. It's just easier to do it right the first time. Okay. So check your data entry with this personal information. Okay. Then they're going to present documents, W-2s and 1099s, and maybe you don't know what all those are. We're going to go over those in the next couple of sessions so that you understand. But the important part here is that if they give you a document, make sure you enter it and make sure it's complete. You've put everything that's in that document in there. We like to see this phrase right here. If you see it, key it. If it's on the form and you see it there, go find the box that's on the TaxSlayer forms, put it in there, even if you're not quite sure you understand what it means, because sometimes TaxSlayer will understand what that means. So we're trying to replicate these documents in TaxSlayer. Okay, so once we've kind of input all of the federal return, then we have to go do the state section. Now, usually, if it's an Arizona return and we've typed in an Arizona address, TaxSlayer will know it's an Arizona return. But sometimes if it messes up and it doesn't have a state return, or let me stop for just a second. We're using TaxSlayer right now. And right now, not all the states are in there. So the first returns that you're going to do, you may not even put in a state. Okay. That's okay, because the certification exams don't really require anything about states. But I would encourage you, it's just good practice to go ahead and do this. Try to create the state return. You'll probably get an error saying that the state returns aren't ready yet. But that depends on when you use TaxSlayer. They'll probably have those loaded by the end of the year. Okay, by the end of December. So anyway, it's a couple ways you do. You click on Add State Return, and then you can either use this drop-down list, or you can go click on the picture of the state. Here you're going to select your Arizona return residency. It's almost always resident right here. As I said, a lot of sites won't even do part year or non-residents. If it's a site with very experienced volunteers, sometimes they may do simple out-of-state returns or part year returns. But whenever if you happen to sit down and the greeter or screener didn't catch that, and they give you a W-2 that's from California, right? Go get your site coordinator involved, okay? Because this may end up being a part year return or a non-resident return or whatever. Generally, 98% of the time it's going to be a resident, 99% of the time. Okay. Then on the Arizona State menu here, we won't go over all of these things, but you're going to put in basic information. There's going to be some things that are additions to income. We'll go over this in session 5. Subtractions from income. There's a bunch of Arizona credits. You may be familiar with those, like for qualified charitable organizations or schools can do that. So that's where you'll input that stuff. So now you get the return kind of done. I always encourage preparers, and this takes, it may take you a couple years of getting some experience under your belt, but it doesn't hurt to start right now thinking. As you're inputting this return, you get a W-2 in front of you, you put in the W-2, be thinking about what the return's going to look like. That's what I always do, because then I go print the return and look at it, and I'm looking down and I'm expecting certain things to come through. And if something doesn't come through, it may just be because I didn't check a box or something in the tax layer screens. So just get started to be thinking about that. And even that said, I would always review a printed copy of the return so you start getting experience of looking at what it looks like when you're done. So, and then the reviewer is going to look at it too. And anyway, so once you get to the screen that says viewer print return, it's going to give you this screen over here, and it's going to show you this over here on the right, which is saying what their adjusted gross income is, AGI, we refer to it as that, what their federal refund is, and what their state refund is. Or if they owed money, this would have a negative number in front of it. I usually don't use this, I usually don't use this screen. You can use this screen to review it, and you can go click, like here we've got wages, and this would take you back to the input screen. This is not how I review the return. Here's how I do. There's 2 ways of printing the tax return. And really when we say printing, we're just saying we're going to generate PDFs of the return so that we can look at it. Now, you as a preparer are not going to print out physical copies of the return for the taxpayer. That's the quality reviewer's job. After they quality review the return and go over it with the taxpayer, then they print it out and have them sign the release to do it. But anyway, there are 2 ways of printing the tax returns. One, when you have a client's tax return open, in the e-file section, I'm going to show you a picture of this in a second, you can click on print return and then it'll generate a PDF screen. So here's where that looks like. We're down here, we've gone down into the e-file part of tax layer, the screens. Remember, I told you on the left-hand menu, there's that navigation menu. Well, now we're down kind of at the bottom. And here we can say, select taxpayer copy print and print this. It's not going to print it to a physical printer. It's going to generate a PDF. Okay. And then that way we could use it. And by the way, here's all the summaries of both the federal and state thing too. Then the second way you can do it is you can go to the main screen and select client search, and then you find the taxpayer and click on this little print icon. I'll show you a picture of it here. Okay. So here I've gone into client search. This would be where you want to get back into a return that you've previously created, right? And it shows all the returns you've created. And here's where you can select that little print button right here. Okay. And that there again, that'll generate a copy, a PDF copy of the return. Okay. So now we're down, here's the e-file section of tax layer of the return. Okay, so it comes up and it says now, hey, you're ready to e-file the return to the IRS. How do you want, which return type do you want? And there's a drop-down box here that's going to show you, I'm going to go back up here. That drop-down will have several options. Do you want to e-file the return and have the check deposited? Do you want to e-file the return and have a check mailed to them? If there's a payment due, do you want to e-file and mail in a payment? Or do you want to e-file and have it taken out of their checking account? Or do you want to call it a paper return, right? Those are the choices that you're going to have here, okay? Most people we encourage them to use direct deposit, or, often when people owe money, they don't really want to do direct debit. I'm not sure why, but even the banks are discouraging you from mailing checks these days because people get in the mailboxes, they can grab the check. They're so sophisticated now, they can change the payee of the check, and it's we're moving more and more towards doing that. However, that said, there are some people that say, hey, just have them send me a check. Do not argue with them. Do not try to convince them otherwise. Slightly encourage them at first if they can. But some people, they're unbanked. They don't have a bank account, right? So they've got to receive a check. So here's where you check that too. You'll notice up here, there's this stream of screens. These are shortcuts to the screens. I found sometimes it won't let you get to these until you've done the other ones. But so once we've chosen that, we go down to return details. If there's an Arizona one, we want to say the same thing. Sometimes, there'll be a balance, there'll be a refund on the federal return, but a balance due on the state, and they may want to send a check for the state. So that's why you have to choose different ones there too. Then it says this form 8879. The 8879 is usually what I put on as the cover page to the printed return we give them. And after I review the return with them, this is what they sign that gives us permission to transmit the return. It also says, there's a bunch of legalese on there that I explain to the taxpayer. And I said this in an earlier video, that usually we're hoping they hear this 3 times. Look, what you're signing here is that you are responsible for everything that's on the return. We just put in what you gave us. And then this is also giving us permission to file it electronically for you. Every taxpayer's got to sign this form. We're going to put in a PIN number right here. And this is nothing special. They don't have to tell you. We just usually use their zip code for the PIN. I've never actually had to go back and remember that, but this is their way of electronically signing the return. The ERO's PIN will automatically populate. You will not have to put that in, okay? So now if they said, hey, I want a direct deposit, the next screen is going to give you banking details. This is very important. You're very accurate with this. I sometimes, when I'm inputting it, I'll make sure the taxpayer can see me do it on the screen. We really prefer them to have a check. However, these days, most of them, they're logging onto their phone into their bank account to get their routing number and account number. And that's okay, but I usually have them look over my shoulder and make sure this is right. If this is wrong, their refund just kind of goes into refund purgatory. It can take forever to get it back. So it's really important we get this stuff right. Then the next screen will come up here and it'll say fee summary. Of course, we don't charge them fees. Just click on continue down here. Click on continue. Then it goes to state ID. Some states require this, okay? Arizona does not. And as I said, you're hardly ever going to be doing, especially as a new volunteer, you'll never be doing an out-of-state return this year, right? It's only in a few sites we do some. But so you'll click on continue here. Now there comes to a taxpayer consent form. And later on in these videos, we're going to talk more about the consents. But just to let you know, there's really only 2 things the taxpayer, it's important for them to know. One is that one of these consents allows their information to be carried forward to the next year. And if they go to a different site, then when the client gives the preparer their social security number, it can pull up the information from last year. Not everything, they can't see the whole return, but their name and address and dependents and that kind of basic information comes forward. What were the companies that they had W-2s from? So you don't have to type in all of the information all over. It makes the return process go a lot faster. And most people are very willing to give that consent. They do not have to. And down here in the next screen, they're going to say where you can deny that. Okay. The other consent that we'll often do is that we can use their information, not their individual. And I tell them this right away. We never disclose any individual information about you to anybody. Okay. But sometimes what we do for grant purposes, things is we aggregate or we total up all the returns we've prepared, all the refunds that we've done into one number that we then use, to promote our program. But we can't do that unless we have your consent. So those are the consents that we'll kind of talk about. Down here, you've got either accept or decline. You have to ask them. Okay. Then the next one is these custom questions, and depending on the partner you're with, they create different questions. It's usually about creating demographic detail. You could skip this screen. I'm not encouraging you to, but it's not required. And sometimes people don't want to disclose stuff about their thing. And some of these drop-down things will say, prefer not to answer. Okay. But there's usually about 8 of these questions that you come down. It's demographic information. Were you ever in the military? What's your race or ethnicity? Here, these first couple of things is, is English your primary language? There's no custom credits that we'll use. And then we get to the submission page. And down here, it kind of gives you a summary. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit more to this screen. There's their federal refund. Here's their state refund. It recaps the pins. It gives you another chance to print the return. So the reviewer often right here is at the point where they're going to print the return out have the client sign it. But then down at the bottom, this is a very important screen. This is the same screen I was on. The last 3 screenshots have been. It's all one screen. And this is a really important one for you as the preparer. First of all, there's these tags up here. And this is just a sample of it. There could be many more. In fact, I've got another screen. I'll show you more. But hey, if this returns incomplete, you want to do that. Maybe it's waiting for a signature. We don't file many paper returns, but if by some chance this is a paper return, you can click this. Here's the really most important thing, is once you finish preparing this return, you mark it ready for review. If you don't, it doesn't show up in the review queue. It shows up as still being worked on, and it just kind of gets lost sometimes. This is really important. You mark this ready for review, then you say that save and exit. These are other return tags that you might have, such as do not transmit. Maybe they're coming back with their bank account information. And usually we'll have something up here, missing information, right? That we'll check that. You can check multiple tags in here, okay? Then you say save and exit return. Now, finishing the return. There's a difference between tags and status. We just talked about those tags, right? Those are internal notes for us to use, like, hey, we're missing some information, or we need to, we need another signature on the return or whatever. But then there's something called status, right? And this is TaxSlayer has set these things such as in progress, ready for review. Remember a moment ago, I said you need to check that button so that now the status turns ready for review. Once it's transmitted, we'll be able to see that it's accepted or rejected. So here's where you see those things. This is when you go into TaxSlayer and you look at the client list, right? Not the new review. All these clients come up. Here's the status. These are showing they're all in progress. Here's where we're going to talk in a minute about putting in notes. Here's where you could print the screen, the return. Remember a minute ago we showed you that. Okay, notes. It's very important to attach notes to the tax return so that you can put in miscellaneous information or important information that if they're coming back with a second W-2 or education expenses, or maybe we're doing an Arizona property tax claim and we want to put in the parcel numbers so that next year the next preparer doesn't have to go look them up again. Lots of reasons for doing that, especially if it's still in progress and they're supposed to be coming back with information. What information is missing? You want to let the site coordinator have it in that note. So if they have to call the taxpayer and say, hey, weren't you going to come back with that second W-2? They know what to ask for. It's really important. Sometimes if the return's rejected, IRS requires us to fix it within 24 to 48 hours. So the site coordinator's got to call them back and know what to ask them for. So there's a couple different places where you can put in notes. This is a screen that after you put in everything, it comes up right to this screen. I showed you right before you're ready to generate a print copy of it. And you can click on this little name here, the little drop-down list right here. And then on the next screen, you'll see here, this is the choices you got from the drop-down. You want to click on Notes right here. And then that's going to give you a note here. This is extremely important. Begin every note with TY 2024. Here's why. Because remember I told you that if they were here in previous years, they come back, their information carries forward. Well, all the notes carry forward too. And if you just put in a note that says missing information, right? And then maybe down here in the text, you say, oh, they have a second W-2 from Amazon. Well, maybe that was for 23. And we may hold up the return thinking, hey, we're missing information for 24, right? So it's really important to start every note with the tax year 2024. Then you might put dash missing information, or dash need signature, or dash whatever you want to put in there. And then you can put in the text for the note down here. So here's what it would look at. You would type in the title, and then you would type in the text, and then you would save the note. And it kind of shows you what it looks like right here. So now that you've got how to get into Parctice Lab and how to navigate somewhere in there, let's have you get started on your first return. So we're going to end this session right here. But before we start the next sessions, get a start in Parctice Lab. You create your account and go in here. So what we want you to do is go into that publication 6744. Remember what that is? That's the test booklet, right? Look through the advanced course scenarios. And if you want, go ahead and start a couple returns and just put in their name and address, because you're going to work at these returns going all the way through the next several sessions. Okay, as we start discussing income or deductions, I'm going to have you go back and start filling in these tax returns so that by the end of all this training, you're ready to take the test. Your returns are all done. So then second, open up that publication 4012. Remember, that's your quick reference guide. If you're a new volunteer, we've given you both of those books in hard copy, or you can use, I'm getting more and more used to using the electronic versions. And here's one reason why to use the electronic versions is I would like you to open up the electronic version of the 4012 and then use the Control and F keys. You can do a keyword search. Remember, that's a pretty thick document. And so go do a keyword search and look for relative, or pick something else you might be interested in. So then you can see all the pages in the 4012 that reference that word, because there's a quick way of finding information. So what are we going to go over in the next session? The next session will be 2A. And 2A, we're actually, we don't really have any homework to review, so we probably won't do that. But we are going to go in depth on the intake and quality review process. Okay. Now, if you've taken that, if you watch the Link and Learn tutorial, and I showed you the publications to look at the intake and interview, and maybe you've even already taken that test, you can skip the first part of 2A. However, but at the end of 2A, we're going to start talking about some really important stuff here. So the second part of 2A will be very important. Actually, I'm going to split these up into two, 2A and 2B, where we'll start talking about this, and I'll probably do filing status and then pick up with dependents for 2B. That's what I'm going to do during the next session. Okay, so that ends our session 1B for today, and I'll look forward to seeing you for session 2A. Okay, bye-bye.